Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Imagine Austin speaker series. My name is Sam Tedford, and I'm a planner with the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. And this speaker series is at its core an opportunity to grow the implementation of Imagine Austin through shared dialogue and mutual learning. We invite targeted thought leaders from around the world to present on ideas that affect our communities past, present, and future on topics ranging from mobility and housing to the natural and built environment to community health and social equity, all in efforts to collectively grow and further the implementation of the vision policies set forth in the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. For our format tonight, we'll begin with a presentation from our wonderful speaker and then follow it with a discussion period in which you will all have an opportunity to ask your questions to the speaker. The event tonight is filmed by ATXN, and it's also being live streamed, and so the video from tonight's presentation will be available on the Imagine Austin website, and so you can share it with those who couldn't make it tonight if you'd like. The Imagine Austin Speaker Series is hosted by the City of Austin Planning and Zoning Department, and the event tonight is a collaboration between Imagine Austin and the City of Austin's Development Services Department, Community Tree Preservation Division. But before we hear from our incredible speaker tonight, I'd like to hand it over to the Director of the Development Services Department, Rodney Gonzalez, to say a few words.
Thank you, Sam. I am the person before Dr. Beatley. Let's see. Welcome to the Imagine Austin Speaker Series. I'm Rodney Gonzalez. I'm the Director for the Development Services Department. And I'm also excited, like Sam is, to be here today to introduce Dr. Timothy Beatley of the Biophilic Cities Network. The network is leading the way in connecting cities like Austin that value our environment and who want to find ways to bring more nature into our urban and suburban settings. I know personally that people thrive when they have a regular dose of nature, and as I told the group earlier at noontime, about 3 weeks ago I had my own dose of nature, thus the allergies. So forgive the coughing, sneezing, hacking, and constant battles with my sinuses. The Development Services Department is committed to serving our community and to protecting our community's character and way of life by supporting responsible development and initiatives like this. We're here today to think outside of the park. And when I say that, I really mean it, because you're going to hear of examples where cities have literally expanded their park systems beyond the traditional boundaries. So how do we as Austinites take elements that we find in our much-beloved Austin parks and bring them out into the city? Might our streets and buildings become parks too? We look today to other cities around the world and what they are doing to accomplish this, and to be inspired and to aspire and to imagine how we can make Austin a more biophilic city in the decades to come. To get more involved in this initiative, I encourage you and I invite you to find Nature in the City in Austin on Facebook. I found it. It's spectacular. Plenty of articles, plenty of events, as well as on Twitter and Instagram at NaturallyATX. Now, a little bit about today's Imagine Austin presenter, Dr. Beatley. Dr. Beatley is the Teresa Hines Professor of Sustainable Communities in the Department of Urban and Environmental Planning, School of Architecture at the University of Virginia, where he has taught for over 25 years. Much of Dr. Beatley's work focuses on the subject of sustainable communities and creative strategies by which cities and towns can fundamentally reduce their ecological footprints, while at the same time being more livable and more equitable. Dr. Beatley believes that sustainable and resilient cities represent our best hope for addressing today's environmental challenges. Dr. Beatley is the author and co-author of more than 15 books on these subjects, including Green Urbanism, Learning from European Cities, Habitat Conservation Planning, Native to Nowhere, Sustaining Home and Community in a Global Age, and Planning for Coastal Resilience. Please welcome Dr. Timothy Beatley. Very good, thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Good. Apologies if you happened to see this earlier in the day. This is sort of the second version of this that I've given. And after spending the day here in Austin and I listened to the code discussions just now, I'm even more appreciative of all the things you're doing here. I think probably you're not going to learn a lot. I don't know. You're already doing so many of these things here in Austin. But Austin has joined our Biophilic Cities network, and we're very excited about that, and we're looking forward to collaborating around that in the future. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this Biophilic Cities network that we have, tell you a bit about what this concept of a biophilic city is, and tell you a little bit about what our cities in the network are doing. So after hearing everything today and having discussion, a really good discussion following the earlier presentation, I frantically tried to find slides to add to my presentation, and I wasn't very successful, but I did add a few. I didn't subtract any, so that's a problem. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So the first thing to say is maybe the obvious, which is that we are, a highly urbanizing planet. We've passed that 50% of the planet living in cities. We're not going to turn that back. And most of us, I'm a city planner, most of us recognize the great advantages of living in cities. But we have a huge sustainability challenge and a huge resilience challenge, and most of us are arguing for the need to densify cities, for cities to become more compact, for us to invest in transit and renewable energy, all those things that we need to become a sustainable planet. As it's been said many times, there will be no sustainability without sustainable cities. So that's a challenge, but we also believe that we need to have connection with nature. We need to have contact with the natural world. And can you do that at the same time that you're densifying cities? Can you have those dense cities and contact with nature? And it's a question mark on this slide, but I'm definitively answering yes, and that's essentially what the Biophilic Cities Project has been about. So we started this project in around 2012. I have to give a lot of credit to E.O. Wilson, Ed Wilson at Harvard. He wasn't the first person to use the word biophilia, but he uses it, he's kind of coined it in the way that we use it today, this idea that we have an innate affiliation or an innate connection to nature, that we're hardwired, he wouldn't use that word probably, but that we carry with us our ancient brains, right? We've co-evolved in that natural world, so it's not a big surprise that we're happier, healthier, able to lead more meaningful lives when we have nature around us. And so that's a key premise of the Biophilic Cities Network and project, and it's nature. The idea is that it's not something optional. It's something absolutely essential, and it can't be just something you get occasionally on a vacation, a summertime trip, which may be fantastic, but we've got to have nature all around us. We've got to have nature that we experience on a daily, if not hourly basis. So that means we've got to have it around us in the neighborhoods where we live and the places where we work. And so it's a huge design and planning challenge, and one that I'm increasingly finding that you're tackling here in Austin after hearing a lot about this today. Here's Ed Wilson again, great quote, "The human species has grown up in nature. We have as a species. It's only been a tiny little bit of our evolutionary history that we've been in. This is a beautiful room. Very often I'm teaching in hermetically sealed buildings without nature and without natural light, but it's a relatively small part of our evolutionary story. So not a big surprise, again, that we feel more comfortable, we're calmer, we're happier when we have nature around us. My good friend and colleague Stephen Kellert, some of you know about Stephen's work. He's done a lot of writing with Ed Wilson about biophilic design and unfortunately passed away in the fall. Very inspirational person for a lot of us, and he used to talk about biophilia as being this weak genetic tendency. And he didn't mean to downplay it by using the word weak, but he believes that it's innate, but it requires some work on our part. It's kind of like a muscle that we have to use. So that's a kind of key premise here as well, that we can't just expect this innate love, or this innate connection to nature to be always felt or always expressed. We've got to find ways to facilitate that, those connections, and that's a lot of what a biophilic city can be. So this is actually an image from a new documentary film that we've been making. actually about cities and oceans, and with a strong emphasis on the connection we have to water and the way that water and the way that aquatic and marine environments make us feel. So in January, we followed a group of about 50 fifth graders into the water. They walked out, didn't have to swim, but they waded out into, kind of waist-deep water. It was the Atlantic Ocean. This is a program put on by the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Biscayne Nature Center in Miami. And it was really quite remarkable. So they split into groups of 5 or 7, and the kids, every 2 students got a little net, and they were shown how to kind of scoop, the surface of the floor of the ocean there and pull it up and see what they discovered. And it was really remarkable to watch it. And these are kids that hadn't had a lot of connection to water or to the marine environment that wasn't really very far away from where they lived. And it was just remarkable to see this awe and fascination and wonder when they saw the stuff that came up out of the water. And I didn't recognize a lot of it myself. I was telling earlier, one of the things that came up up in a net, and it was all the students were awestruck, was this what looked like a tennis ball, this inflated yellow, and it turned out to be a puffer fish. And the kids were like, "What is that?" And then they put it down they had a little floating tank where all the specimens were collected. And they watched as the puffer fish deflated. And it was a fish again. And it was just remarkable. So we tried to capture this on film, and we followed them into the ocean with cameras, and it was quite a little spectacle. But it was a demonstration, I think, of what we need to do to kind of activate that biophilic sensibility that we all carry with us. It just does require some exercising. So we started this thing in 2012, the Biophilic Cities Project. It was, in the beginning, a research project. We had funding from the Summit Foundation, a Washington, D.C.-based foundation. We did a lot of our work through 10 cities, looking at 10 cities around the U.S. and around the world, cities like Singapore, Wellington, New Zealand, Vitoria-Gasteiz, the capital of the Basque Country in Spain. And our objectives were to sort of find out what the best cities were doing to design nature to incorporate nature into their design and planning. And then on the last day, or the last phase of this work, we brought everybody to Charlottesville, Virginia, where I live. And we had a 4-day conference, and on the last day of that conference, everybody went out on our downtown mall, and we had this sort of big Publishers Clearinghouse sized pledge, Biophilic Cities Pledge, and they signed it in great dramatic fashion. This is Lena Chan who heads the National Biodiversity Center in Singapore. And it occurred to all of us that this was the beginning of an urban movement, really, and that we need a network. And that's really what became a launching of our global network, and that was 2013. So since that time, we've done a lot of things, and just to back up, we have a new logo, we have a new web page, and we're actually on our way to an even newer web page in about 2 weeks. I have a couple of tasks for you tonight, a couple of assignments. One is to find at least 3 ways to use the word biophilic over the next day's conversation, right? Work it in you have to explain what it is. So that's one assignment. The second one is go to our website, which is biophilic.cities.org, and you can actually join the network as an individual or an organization, and you just go online and sign a pledge. And you can surf around and see a little bit about what we're up to and what the network is all about. It's been exciting, especially the last few months. Austin has joined, yay. But we've also had other cities. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, St. Louis. I've got some slides from St. Louis to show you. Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C., Edmonton, Canada. And in fact, a lot of the rest of the slides I have are slides about those cities and some of the things that they're doing. So it's gaining traction. We've been describing it as a global movement. That may be a bit presumptuous of us, but we think it is. And we think it represents one of the reasons that it's so compelling and so gaining such traction is I think, especially now, we know all the things we need to do to be sustainable and to be resilient, and we know all the things we've got to do. But in a sense, the sustainability agenda has sometimes been about, hitting us over the head and telling us what we can't, we've got to consume less and we've got to use less energy and we've got to reduce our carbon footprint. But the biophilic cities concept and movement is really about mapping out a future we want, a vision of the kind of places we want to live in. And they're, places that are profoundly natureful, and that's the main point. So we've discovered, actually, that there's a need for this inner city network, but we've discovered, actually, within our partner cities, there's also a need for an intra-city network. So we've been helping grassroots organizations form in various cities, mostly in the US at this point. One of the new organizations is called Biophilic DC. That's Washington, D.C. And they had a lot to do, actually, with the grassroots campaign to get the D.C. City Council to adopt the Biophilic Cities Resolution and to be part of the network. These are actually images from the building at the University of the District of Columbia, where we had our launch event, our kind of celebratory event in Washington. And every city, each city is doing something a little bit different and a little bit special. And in Washington, there is an initiative around food. And so this is actually a picture of Dean Sabine O'Hara. She is dean of this really innovative sustainability school at UDC. And she's helping to spearhead this effort to establish urban food hubs throughout the city of Washington. It's a really interesting story. And actually, these images are from the roof of her building, which is itself a story. It's a rooftop garden, 18 inches of soil produced, actually, especially along the edges of the building where you have the strongest reinforcement for that kind of deeper soil. And they're producing a remarkable amount of food, and it's very biophilic. So much food that they're actually operating a CSA out of the ground floor. So a community-supported agriculture, so shares that people are coming and getting every week from food grown on the roof. So that's Washington, one of our recent members. Edmonton, Canada has recently joined as well. Edmonton's a really amazing story of a northern city, and a city that has been getting a lot of attention, in fact, for its efforts at imagining itself as an ecosystem. It is an ecosystem, doing everything, all the design and planning and all the projects, public and private, have to sort of connect to this ecological network. And in particular, an emphasis on movement of wildlife and animals in this city. So it's become a bit famous. It's just completed, I think, its 27th wildlife passage in the city. So this idea that small passageways, but also rather large ones, underpasses and overpasses and landscape connections in the city that allow the movement of animals through that city. And that's a key sort of goal. And they have new design guidelines that apply to building any kind of new infrastructure. Really interesting. I mentioned earlier that we have a new film that we've made about Edmonton. And in going through the production of this film, it was a collaboration with a filmmaker, a filmmaking company, and our colleagues in Edmonton. And the first draft of this film about Edmonton, it was all about the beautiful summer nature in that city. And if any of you have spent any time in Edmonton, particularly in December or January, it's a wintry city. So our colleagues in Edmonton had this reaction to the film, well, that's nice, but half the year it doesn't look anything like that. The nature's quite a bit different. So this, by the way, was from an event that we had in June, and it's Grant Pearsall in the middle, who is the head of biodiversity and parks for the city of Edmonton. We had 250 people come out to the Edmonton Public Library to celebrate the city joining the Biophilic Cities Network, which we're quite impressed by that. So they've been trying to figure out how, part of the challenge of being a biophilic city is how do you get outside? How do you propel people outside? because that's, more than 90% of our day is spent indoors. And we have to think about the nature of indoor environments. But we also, Biophilic City is a city that aspires to, it's that exercising that muscle, getting us out, tempting us with that outdoor life. So in Edmonton, they've developed a winter strategy to do that, essentially. And it's really quite interesting. They have, this is the third year, I think, that they've built this huge ice castle. It's the place to see. They've adopted a set of winter urban design guidelines. So how do you create warming stations and places in the city where there are evergreen trees that block the wind and make it a tad bit more pleasant to be outside. And there was a master's student, an architecture master's student, who came up with this very interesting idea called the freeze way. Have you heard about this? The idea of being able to commute, perhaps, to work on skates. So the city's now calling them ice ribbons, which is really, really cool. And Chicago has now taken this idea, inspired by Edmonton, and they had at least one big ice ribbon this year. It was more kind of on a track, and less about commuting to work. But an interesting idea. So this is one of the challenges, particularly in northern latitude cities, where the weather may not be great for being outside. Pittsburgh joined the network in the fall, and we've been enjoying getting to know that city. Again, every city has its own special contexts and its own special nature. In Pittsburgh, it's about connecting to the three rivers and getting more people in direct contact with that water. And so they have a water trail for canoes and kayaks, and they have a whole strategy of new parks for along the river, including this park, which on the left, which is a floodable park, a resilient park that sometimes, may be rather watery, but other times is available for recreation. They're quite proud of their tree canopy coverage of 42%. I heard earlier today Austin is 37%. Did I hear that correctly? A couple of different numbers around. That's very good. 34 to 37 or 30. Okay, that's great as well. But we don't mind a little friendly competition between the biophilic cities in our network. And Atlanta, I think, is 48 maybe or something. Yes, well, that's right. There are questions about how you calculate it. So this is Mayor Peduto in Pittsburgh. We had a major celebratory event there at the Phipps Conservatory, a wonderful biophilic facility there, and actually a new living buildings, certified living building structure, and lots of really cool things happening in Pittsburgh. This is a global movement, so we have a lot of cities around the world that we're talking with, and hopefully will be joining the network. One of them is Chengdu, China. We spent some time there in the fall. They have been doing some remarkable things already, including this remarkable ecological ring that circles the center of the city, a city of about 10 million. And this is a network of wetlands and green spaces, and it will do many different things for the city, including flood retention, which is a major goal. So a number of things that we're up to with this network. We've been disseminating a lot of information. We've been telling the compelling stories of cities in the network. We have a brand new Biophilic Cities journal. This is all, by the way, online. If you want to see the inaugural issue of the Biophilic Cities journal, I'd encourage you to find it. So we're on our third or fourth webinar series now. We've been making films, as I said, about many of these cities. One of the films I'd recommend is the 45-minute film we did about Singapore. If you want to find it, it's all on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, so you could Google Singapore Biophilic City. It's been very interesting to us how films and filmmaking, you can talk and you can even show photographs, but there's something very powerful about putting a camera in front of someone and having them talk about their neighborhood or their project or their city. And that's essentially what we do. So they're relatively low-budget films. You'll see this if you watch them. But the Singapore film, as an example, has been widely watched, and I think it's got 60,000 views or something in a relatively short period of time. So we're hoping that there will be a film about Austin. And so every city in the network will hopefully have at least one film, maybe more. So this is just to carry on with the filmmaking idea, and these are some images from our filming in Baltimore. A very interesting program by the Baltimore Parks and Rec Department to get kids from neighborhoods not very far away from the Inner Harbor, but kids that have, for the most part, never done this, never been on the water, don't have that kind of direct contact with that water nature. So to back up a little bit, what do we know about the evidence? And what do we know about the reasons for caring about biophilic cities? This is probably the slide with the most text on it in the entire presentation. So there are many reasons. And as the title to the talk suggests, there are some really important mental health benefits. We know that contact with nature calms us. It reduces our stress levels. Long-term chronic stress is probably the single most serious health issue that we face in cities, I would say, or one of the really big ones. And nature, we respond in really positive ways to nature. Nature enhances our cognitive abilities. It makes us feel better. We have evidence about the power, the social building, social capital building dimensions of nature. Nature brings us together as a species. We have all this evidence now about if you have a deeper, more extensive network of friends, you're more likely to be healthier. Mortality from cancer goes down with a more extensive network of friends. Nature's not the only thing that will bring us together, but there's something very special about nature, a power that nature has to foster friendships and to bring people together in communities. We have a lot of evidence actually coming out of experimental psychology that we are more likely to be generous in the presence of nature. We're more likely to be cooperative in the presence of nature. We're more likely to be better human beings when we have nature around us. Maybe, again, not a big surprise. Evidence coming out of economics that we're more likely to think longer term if we have nature around us. I also believe in the importance of wonder. We don't talk enough about wonder and awe and the important opportunities in cities. I'm often talking about biophilic cities as cities that maximize potential moments of awe. So we ought to be able to walk through a city and experience a natureful, awe-inspiring moment. And they're happening all around us, of course, and we're often not paying attention. And then finally, a lot of us in planning are talking about resilience. We have the 100 resilient cities and understandable and necessary planning emphasis, resilience. I do a lot of work in that area as well. And I would say that virtually anything that we can do to make a city more natureful, to make it more biophilic, will also make it more resilient, whether that means trees and forests to cool urban environments, or green rooftops and green walls to retain stormwater, all those things that almost anything that you can think of to grow more nature in the city will make that city more resilient. So we could spend the whole time that I have just on the evidence of the power of nature. It's changing, it's growing almost daily. This is from 2 weeks ago, an article in Bioscience, actually a University of Exeter in the UK study showing that there's a connection between how present birds are. If you're likely to live in a neighborhood, if you're living in a neighborhood where you're more likely to see birds, your mental health is likely to be better. So your depression, anxiety, and stress will be lower. We're still, working on causality. This is all kind of correlational, but pretty compelling to me and pretty convincing for the most part. Some of you know about the long-standing work coming out of Japan around this concept of forest bathing. This idea that as you walk through a forest, at the end of that walk, all the beautiful, the sights, the sounds, the dappled light, the experience of walking in that forest, at the end of that walk, Japanese have found that your stress hormone levels go down. That walk will boost your immune system. Not a big surprise, again. And the Japanese are so convinced about this that they've established a network of forest therapy stations in cities around that country. So again, we have this sort of growing evidence. This is a study that hasn't been published yet, but from researchers at the University of Minnesota showing that if you're waiting at a transit stop or a bus stop, if that stop has trees around, your perceived wait time will be lower. So nature has this ability to kind of make us, to sort of soften, the urban edge and the other stresses that we find in urban living. A few years ago, we did a documentary film called The Nature of Cities, and actually we filmed here at the Lady Bird Johnson Center. We filmed the bats. I have a slide in just a minute about Mexican free-tailed bats. This is a story from that film. It was playing on PBS for a while. This is 5-6 years ago. The entire film, it's called The Nature of Cities, and it's all online if you want to watch it. But these are two best friends who are tracking. They're amateur urban wildlife trackers. So they are fascinated. They're able to distinguish the finer points of a domestic cat's paw print versus a bobcat's paw print. So we decided we were going to film them one day, and it was quite interesting. We had trouble keeping up with them, and they were going down trails, and at a certain point they went off the trail, and we heard the rustling, and we weren't sure what was going on, and then we heard this ecstatic yelping, and they had just discovered some blood on a branch, and they thought they were just seconds away from seeing the resident female bobcat that they were hoping to see. And for us, it was an epiphany because they told us on the film, they talk about this on the film, that this nature is what brought them together. They're best friends, but the neighborhoods around this canyon, this is one of the sort of mini skipped-over canyons in San Diego, Rose Canyon, and this neighborhood is the neighborhoods around the canyon are quite diverse, but the thing they have in common, the thing that brings them together is this canyon. So anyway, it's an example of the social building, the social capital building potential of nature in biophilic cities. So what are biophilic cities? I've given you a little bit of, already a little suggestion about some of the things. It's ideally a city that propels us outside. It's a city that, puts us in contact with nature, that fosters that connection, that connectedness to nature and ourselves. We could express the biophilic urbanism idea or city idea in many different ways. I mentioned the online pledge. This is a version of it, so we could express this idea in words. The idea of putting nature at the center of our design and planning, the idea of emphasizing the importance of biodiversity, nature, wildness in our design and planning, and that's what urban life ought to be about, fostering connections and connectedness to nature. Many of our cities in the network are going even a little bit further than this, and I hadn't quite realized the history of the slogan, or Austin as a city and a park, and I wonder where that is. That been around for a long time, I wonder? We'll have to find out.
It was around for quite a while, and then a decision was made for a new one.
A new, yeah. Well, I think it's time to bring it back. So one of the main points I often make is that we're moving from a model of cities. For a while we had trouble even imagining nature in cities. Nature and cities were these sort of polar opposites, right? We've gotten over that. But I think we're still stuck in a model of cities and nature that sees nature as being in particular places in cities. So we go to that nature. We live in a city and we go down the street to the park to find that nature, or we visit a forest at some distance away, or we get in our car and go to and those spaces are important. We like parks, of course, but the new model is really let's change the way we see the very idea of a city. So why must we think of nature as being in that park? Why don't we imagine ourselves living in the park? That's essentially what your motto says. Why don't we see our city as a garden or see our city as a forest? We don't go to visit the forest. Our city is a forest. We're living in the forest. And that's what a number of our cities are doing. Singapore is perhaps the best example. They've recently changed their motto from Singapore, a garden city, to Singapore, a city and a garden, which is a small change, but a very significant one indeed. And so Singapore is an interesting model for us to look at, and this is an example of one of the recent buildings in that city. We've gotten to know Woha, the architects of this. It's a hotel called Park Royal, and it redefines the very nature of a building. It's a very living sort of building. And remarkable sky gardens and hanging green nature, and it's actually an expression of a policy, that a requirement that the city now imposes, this thing called the landscape replacement policy. So if you build something in Singapore, you have to replace the nature lost at the ground level by the footprint of the building. You have to replace that in the form of vertical greenery. So at least 1-to-1. And what's going on now is friendly competition in that city. There's a building under construction that's replacing ground level nature 900%. Actually by the same Woha architects. So the model that Singapore is implementing is this idea of having multiple layers. You have a forest canopy, and that forest canopy connects. There's canopy level, there's ground level park space, there are green roofs and vertical green elements that ideally connect with that forest canopy cover. So you have this emerging idea of a fully integrated ecological urban system. And that's really what we need to imagine, and a nature immersive city. So that's remarkable. This is one of the stories we tell in this Biophilic Singapore film online, is the KTPH, which is a remarkable hospital. It's probably the most biophilic hospital or health facility I've ever seen. We had a wonderful time learning about it and filming the story, and this is the CEO, and he talks on the film about how the design requirement of this hospital was, as you see here, it has to not just heal patients, which is a key aspect, but as you check into this hospital, your blood pressure should go down, not up. Your stress levels should go down, not up. Hospital visits are almost by definition stressful, right? And this is a hospital that actually in the climate makes this easier, but this is not a walled-off hospital. This is actually a place where high school students come to do their homework in the afternoon. It's a garden, and it's a hospital in a garden. Everything's in a garden in Singapore now. It's remarkable. The other really impressive thing about this and many of the other things being built in Singapore under this model is that they're judging the outcome, the success of this building in some really interesting ways. As you see in that second quote, this is meant to be restorative. So they're judging the success of this hospital by the number of species of butterflies and birds that they count. And they have a running tally on several walls in the hospital. An interesting way of thinking about how we build in the city. Other cities, Melbourne, Australia, we've been in discussion with them. We hope they'll join the network. They have just adopted a very progressive, very ambitious urban forest strategy. They're aspiring to double their tree canopy coverage by 2040. What's more remarkable, though, is that they are aspiring, they're explicitly saying, we don't want to just have more trees in the city. We want to be a city in a forest. And that's how they're seeing themselves, seeing their city. You may have heard a little bit about them. They've been engaging in they've been using some interesting public engagement techniques. It's gotten some international attention. So every tree in the city has its own unique number. It's on a GIS system. And every tree in the city has its own unique email address. So you are encouraged to send a loving email to your favorite tree That's biophilia, love of nature. You can actually, and the tree will email you back. So that's pretty interesting as well. So we actually had the head of that program did a webinar for us. It's on our webinar on our YouTube channel if you're interested. And she talks about she has these great examples of what people say, what they say to trees that they love. And we need to encourage more of that. And people from all over the world, actually, they didn't live in, people not just living in Melbourne, but all over the place. I guess they know some of the trees in Melbourne. I don't know. So that's interesting, this immersive nature. A lot of other ways that we could express the urban design idea or the city planning notions of a biophilic city. Integrated, multi-scaled, green space and nature. This is a map of Helsinki. And Helsinki has a wonderful green network, and it's integrated. And so this idea of whole of city. So we want nature around us where we're working and where we're living. So it's room or rooftop to region or bioregion in every scale in between. And those scales need to be integrated and need to connect. So whole of city is so this idea that you walk outside your flat or your office and you have nature all around you, and that you can move to progressively larger amounts of nature as you move out. And so Helsinki is a good example of that. You can move, in a continuous way, you can travel from the center of this pretty dense city all the way out to old growth forest at the edge of that city. That's a very biophilic city. We're imagining cities as being shared spaces. We know there are lots of other creatures that we co-occupy these spaces with. We don't necessarily, we're not always looking for them or aware that they're there, but they are. So a city is a biodiverse space, and it's a shared space. And here's Merlin Tuttle. You all know the story here. We had the delightful experience of filming Merlin right before one of the evening events, and we waded into the audience. It was really fun interviewing young kids as they were anticipating seeing the bats, and it was just beautiful and wonderful. And it's a kind of wildness as well, right? So we have lots of stories, not wilderness in the city, but wildness, this concept of wild. These are images from Richmond, Virginia, where we have the James River just a few hundred feet from downtown, or Class 4 rapids. It's a beautiful, wild river, and there's a part of it that's a pipeline trail. You can actually walk on a pipeline in the river, and it's daring and not terribly dangerous, but it's an incredible wildness. And there's a blue heron rookery, and there are bald eagles nesting nearby, and the city is trying to foster this wildness and connect to this wildness, and they're actually talking about the James River as sort of their Central Park. We heard earlier Central Park is certainly artificially designed with a certain amount of wildness there, and finding creative ways to get residents down to that water. In one case, you can't see it very well, but a very creative bridge. The footbridge and a bicycle bridge, this upper right image, actually hangs down from a highway bridge crossing the highway. So it actually, it moves, and you get the most spectacular views of this river as you're walking across, and it's down below you. Wildness has got to be part of this. So we've been filming this new film about cities and oceans, and in January we spent a little time in Gig Harbor, Washington. Part of the challenge in a biophilic city is to make that invisible nature visible, and we really, it's part of what we need to be doing. This is a wonderful story, not a very expensive thing that they're doing, but they actually they put up a screen certain evenings and have a public event. They send a couple of volunteer divers into the water with a GoPro camera and some lights, and they send back these real-time images of the nature underwater. And a naturalist is talking about what's being seen in real time. We need to be more creative about making that nature visible. This is a program called Peer into the Night, and the organization is called Harbor Wild Watch. So we're very much interested in cities that foster this wildness. This is the example of Bristol in the UK. We have a few UK cities. Birmingham actually is now part of our network. This idea of living in a wild city. Wouldn't you want to live in a nature reserve? Make your city a nature reserve. Same idea as, a city in a garden. And so a lot of emphasis on wildness. The Wildlife Trusts in the UK is an interesting story, and they've been fostering a lot of connections to nature in a lot of creative ways. So last June, they had this campaign called 30 Days Wild, in which you were encouraged to take a pledge that you were going to do at least one wild thing a day. Pretty interesting. And these were random acts of wildness. Is what you're supposed to do. Random acts of wild. Do some of that today, maybe. That's your third assignment on top of the other two that I. And actually, they've discovered. I guess I don't have the number, but it's something like. Well, there it is. 1 million. They've actually added up the number of random acts of wildness. Some of them not so random. They're kind of planned. We're going to go on a picnic, or we're going to go on a kayak expedition, or whatever. So wildness. And so wildness, the whole of city approach, we also argue that a biophilic city is one that aspires to a whole of life approach. So we want cities where you are engaged in nature from almost the start of your life, right? We've heard today earlier about great school-based initiatives here. The school park idea is a really neat one here. We have lots of examples. The Key Biscayne, or the Biscayne Nature Center, is an example of that. So you ought to have that exposure as a young child, and then all the way through the other stages of your life, right? Into our elder years. We've made a little film about Jane Rouse in her 90s, and she's a co-founder of the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy and Preserve. It's a 30,000-acre desert preserve in Scottsdale, Arizona. We have a whole kind of biophilic phoenix initiative right now. And she epitomizes what the power of nature later in life. So she goes out every day, guides groups and does trail cleanups, and very engaged at that age in the nature. And her doctor tells her that he's very happy. Her bone density is up and her weight is down, and she's engaged. She has lots of friends, and she's an inspiration in many ways, and an inspiration and a major sort of conservation figure in Arizona. We're also thinking that biophilic cities ought to be judged a little bit differently, that the goalposts ought to be a little bit different maybe, that our measures of success ought to be a little bit different. And here are two sets of examples. I mentioned St. Louis. St. Louis has just joined our network. We had a big event there 2 weeks ago. On the left is Mayor Slay. The left image, Mayor Slay and Catherine Warner, who's the sustainability director. Mayor Slay is coming to the end of his, I think he's served 4 terms, maybe 5 terms. Been a very popular mayor. And he set the goal of planting 250 butterfly gardens in the city of St. Louis. Mayors promise many things, right? Planting butterfly gardens is not usually what they promise, but this has been a cornerstone of a part of his platform. And actually, they've reached their 250, and now they've actually planted 370, I learned. I've been visiting two weeks ago. That's an interesting metric, or an interesting way of judging the success of a city, that you might live in a neighborhood where you've got butterfly gardens, and you can see butterflies. On the right, images from Wellington, New Zealand, another partner city. They have a wonderful story of a wild preserve in the middle of the city called Zealandia, where they've erected a predator-proof fence. And the goal there is to bring back species of native birds that have been so decimated by cats and other non-native species, and it's working. What's happening is this is a kind of a center of propagation, and the birds, the parrots that haven't been seen in years, are showing up first in the neighborhoods around Zealandia, but kind of moving out from there. Well, the tagline is bringing birdsong back to Wellington. So one measure of success could be that we have a city where most neighborhoods, most people can hear native birdsong That's an unusual metric for us, but really important. We have, by the way, a lot of evidence about the biophilic power of birdsong. We have hospitals in the UK that are recording birdsong and then playing it back. Children's hospitals are playing it back at times when children are going into stressful times, or going into surgery or having inoculations. We're just beginning to fully appreciate that power. A lot of very interesting techniques or strategies or tools for mapping the nature. This is maybe another example of making the nature visible in a city. This is hot off the press 2 weeks ago, connecting with Nature Map that the city of St. Louis has prepared. You can't see that very well, but butterflies, those are especially important public butterfly gardens. This will eventually be an online map. Wellington has been piloting a very interesting online digital mapping system for the nature there, and you can't see the icons very well, but if you go online, you can hover over a bird and it will tell you what it is or what that place is. So it's the living nature, but it's also nature activities. So one of my main points about biophilic cities is it's not just the presence or absence of nature that defines a biophilic city. It's how engaged the population is. How much do we enjoy that nature? How much time do we spend outside? How much do we care about that nature? Can we identify common species of flora and fauna? So it's as much about what we do in response to that nature, how we live our lives, as it is about the presence or absence of nature. So Wellington, I think every city needs something like this to guide us and make visible what's around us. Really interesting dimension to the Wellington approach has to do with non-living nature. So there's a whole biophilic design community out there, and they think it's just as important to talk about shapes and forms of nature, nature images that may not be living nature. And that's another aspect of this. So this is actually a map that shows you biomorphic and biophilic architecture. And it is remarkable in Wellington. I don't think the Wellingtonians even fully understand why this is the case, but they can't seem to build anything that doesn't have a reference to nature. So these are bollards, public space bollards in the shape of fern fronds, and even something as mundane as a trash can has to have a biophilic flourish of some kind, something very embedded in the culture in Wellington. We need to figure it out, I think. Biophilia is not just about what you see. We argue that a biophilic city is a multisensory city, so we are as concerned about sound, for example. I forgot to load the sound file again, but one of my favorite songs about this time of year and in the summer is the eastern wood thrush. I don't know if you have a thrush like that here. You have some beautiful bird sounds in this part of the world, but this is a flute-like sound that particularly in the evening or early in the morning, and for me, it's a place-embedding sound. It brings back all my childhood memories, calms me down. And it's a voice, as this great Val Plumwood quote suggests. We've got to start thinking about what we hear. We've got to be curious about what we hear, and we've got to kind of begin to think about those sounds as voices, and back to this idea of co-sharing or co-inhabiting the spaces of a city with other forms of life. Just kind of almost a more biocentric view. So tell me, you're going to keep track of time. How are we doing? Oh my gosh. Okay. So here is the point where I segue into the photo essay portion, and I'll maybe do the 5 or 10 seconds per slide. I've already made this point, but we are developing a set of metrics, and all the partner cities have to choose certain indicators from different categories. So again, it's not just forest canopy coverage or percentage of population within a certain distance of nature, all the kind of conventional things by which we measure nature. It's also some of these other things. How engaged are residents, and how much investment does a city have? What percentage of a city's budget goes to nature, as an example? I talk a lot about this idea of curiosity, the culture of curiosity, and I don't quite know, we haven't quite figured out how to measure this yet, but it is indicative, I think, of a biophilic city. Nature takes many forms, and I've made this point already. We've gotten to know, there's a Spanish designer, Marc Granion, who's come up with this structure for installing green roofs on the rooftops of buses. There's a couple of cities in Spain that have these buses. If you're interested, he's done a webinar for us. It's also on our web site. So we are trying to find ways to understand the forms that nature takes in a city, and whether, in what ways that nature, adds to contributes to kind of the minimum amounts of nature we need. Is there something like a minimum daily requirement of nature? I don't know. We have evidence now that even 40 seconds of viewing nature has positive therapeutic value for us. So we've very much liked this idea of the nature pyramid. We're using it in the partner cities. This is the Singapore version. It's modeled after the food pyramid. My colleague Tanya Dankla-Cobb is actually, it's originally her idea. We love it. We've kind of fleshed it out a little bit, and so Singapore is using its own species and its own projects. But like the food pyramid, it's meant to guide our nature diet. So the stuff at the top of that pyramid, like the food pyramid, they're foods that we want and need in relatively small quantities. We've got to build that healthy diet with fruits and vegetables and things at the base of that food pyramid. Similarly with the urban nature diet, that's what we're proposing. So that may be really immersive, faraway experience, visiting a national park somewhere. That's a good experience. We can't afford the carbon footprint associated with everyone everyone satisfying their nature diet in that way. So we've got to think about what's at the base of that pyramid, and it's local bird song, and it's all the things that might be around you during a day or during an hour of that day. And that's really what we're, 5 minutes. Okay, so here really I'll translate, I promise. Now, so a really quick survey. Vitoria-Gasteiz, the Basque Country, has developed a green ring. By the way, we have a new book that has just come out that has chapters about all of these places. So there's a chapter about Vitoria. They're doing wonderful things now to extend this idea, talking about an interior green ring, if that makes sense. It does to them. It's a terrific idea, bringing that nature into the center of the city. So they're daylighting a major stream that runs through the city and renaturalizing that stream. Oslo, 2/3 of the city is in protected forest. The other third is densifying. They have a wonderful network of urban trails. You see the map on the lower right. Upper right is a new green plan. They're aspiring to daylight and restore the 8 major rivers in that city that connect the forest and the fjord. A really ambitious plan. Milwaukee has been a partner city. Wonderful examples like Alice's Garden, community gardening space, but also a community center, and a meeting place, and a place for job generation in a fairly depressed neighborhood in that city. Milwaukee has done a lot of really interesting things to recycle land. They have this program called Homegrown, and this is an example of taking two lots, vacant lots, and creating a park out of those spaces, Ezekiel Gillespie Park here. If you're interested in this, they've recently done a webinar for us as well. I mentioned Singapore, lots of dimensions to the Singapore story, including their park connectors, this network of trails and pathways that take you to large nature, and much of it is at the sort of forest canopy, elevated forest canopy level. Really remarkable story. And the landscape replacement policy, they also have significant financial incentives and subsidies. 50% of the cost of installing a green wall, for instance, is covered by the government. San Francisco has been one of our partner cities as well, and they've done some, as most of you know, remarkable things with parklets and taking small urban spaces and creating parks. These are images from the story about their sidewalk landscape permit that they've created in that city, largely because of the advocacy of this person, Jane Martin, who lives in the Mission District. She wanted to take up some of the pavement in her neighborhood, and found the existing permitting system very onerous and expensive, so able to create this new kind of expedited sidewalk landscape permit to allow residents to do that. And there have been 2,000 of them issued since 2006. She also has done a webinar for us. Bird-friendly design guidelines in that city as well that are quite impressive. A number of our cities are doing something in the way of planning and design for birds. This is my last slide. A number of cities are perched on the edge of an ocean. They're coastal, have a kind of marine and aquatic dimension. Wellington has an extensive network of green belts, and now they're aspiring to develop a network of blue belts. They're surrounded by water on three sides, and much of the nature is underwater, and the biodiversity is marine. So this idea of cities embedded in an integrated, terrestrial, marine, integrated land-sea landscape is really compelling. We're seeing a lot of cities interested in this. So please, again, visit biophilic.cities.org, and here's the last slide that if you want to buy that book, and you write down this little code that gives you a 20% discount. So thank you for listening, and do we have any time for questions or comments at this point?
30 minutes for questions.
Oh, we do have that much time. Okay, fantastic.
We do have a mic here. Now, first of all, let's thank our speakers.
Thanks.
And then we do typically have a 30-minute Q&A.
Okay.
Working?
Hi.
Thank you for coming. I won't hold it against you if you don't have an answer to this question.
Well, I probably won't.
Okay.
Okay.
So I saw this video on YouTube about Yellowstone and the reintroduction of wolves. They're like a keystone species, so more wolves means fewer elk, less erosion, better regulation of local fauna.
Yeah.
Can you envision or imagine a similar effect in urban landscapes in managing natural resources to the benefit of the economy generally, or maybe just to citizens? Does that make any sense?
It does. Absolutely. So I'm imagining there are several ways to answer that question. The reference to wolves and Yellowstone, makes me think of the strategies of cities like Edmonton. We were talking earlier today. Austin is now apparently part of this Lincoln Park Zoo initiative in Chicago. It's part of a new network of cities thinking about how wildlife in cities, thinking about the kind of ecology of wildlife in cities. And you have coyotes here, I'm assuming, yes? And they have been studying this in Chicago. They have more than 100 camera traps throughout the city, and they have learned some fascinating things about what's going on. And the coyotes coming in have, there are certain effects that apparently the foxes now are in some ways being pushed out because of the coyotes, and the coyotes are kind of, learning, adapting to those urban environments and learning how to look both ways before they cross streets. And many cities have, of course, concerns about a variety of coexistence issues, including perceived overpopulation of deer, for example. So we've got to begin to sort of better imagine that urban system as an ecosystem and begin to understand those interrelationships between the different, the flora and fauna that occupy that city. So the second part of what you asked about, though, was a little different.
Yeah, can you imagine a similar effect where maintaining keystone species or specific types of
Bless you.
flora or fauna can help regulate resources within an urban landscape to the benefit of the citizens?
Well, I think all of what I just said is to the benefit of us. That's one answer. I like coyotes, as you can tell, sort of from my vision of a city as a co-inhabited space. We've got to figure out how to coexist. We're not, and it's really not optional anyway, right? With species like coyotes, they're here. So if we want to coexist humanely with them, there are certain things we can do. For instance, we have to work hard to make sure they continue to be fearful of humans. That's the number one principle. But we have them. I love to hear them. I love to see them occasionally, but we have to, coexistence takes active planning on our part. And so that's true for almost all of the things that occupy cities, and they're tremendous benefits. I've just talked about birds, a lot. So the quality of life that we have in a city, the meaningful existence we have, to me, depends a lot on that nature, having that nature. That's why I want to have it. And so if you're talking about economic benefits and other kinds of benefits, which also, flow from those investments.
At the risk of taking up too much time and
sure.
answering my own question, we have problems with drought in this part of the country.
Okay.
I imagine, finding ways to encourage local flora.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So back to the point about resilience and the kinds of strategies the kinds of natureful strategies you employ will depend on where you are. Green roofs are not going to work in Phoenix. It's something else that's working there, but it's native vegetation and it's mesquites and cacti and very profoundly natureful things that are well adapted to that environment and low water and drought tolerant and all of that. And we need to work on all those things. Every city, you're doing it here. And you're using the native palette of what you have here and planning accordingly. So okay, other.
Yeah. So I just want to say two things. I was going to save this till the end, but if you are leaving, please fill out a survey. Also, limit yourself to one question. Thanks. It's okay. And speak very close to the microphone.
Okay, how's this, everybody?
That's great.
All right. First, a comment, a remembrance. So you mentioned the high school students doing their homework.
Yes.
I remember when I was a kid, a new library opened up, and inside they had palms.
Oh.
And it was a really great place to study,
Yeah.
to study and work and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
And then also, you talked about the hotel in Singapore. They had all the plants on the outside. Well, I remember in the 1970s, the hotel in San Francisco, the first one that opened, that had the whole indoor atrium with all the plants growing down on the inside, and that was something new back then.
Yeah.
And I remember being very taken with that.
That's right. And that was we've gone a long way, and we've come a long
then,
way,
yeah.
and we've people like Patrick Blanc, who've really kind of pioneered green walls, interior and exterior green walls, and
So I just want to mention that because I just thought
I
that's
think
really cool,
that's
making that
nice,
memory.
memory.
That nice memory. But what I really wanted to ask you about was something that comes up. Barbara Kingsolver had a really good quote. Unfortunately, I can't remember it. But basically, she said something about don't forget about the forgotten places, the forgotten nature areas. So even just a ditch, right?
Absolutely.
So my big question for you is,
Yeah.
what counts as wild? What counts as wild in
It's
the
a
city?
great question.
Are pigeons part of that?
Yes.
So when we talk about those corridors in the cities and some of those maps that you had, do just simple tree-lined streets
Yeah.
count for that? Do
Yeah.
houses that have balconies with little gardens, do they count along the way?
Yes.
And how much do we have people who are just walking through the trees but don't recognize them?
Yeah.
Because it's just part of what's there.
Yeah.
So how much is that nature
Yeah.
for a lot of people? That's either one, waking
Yeah.
them up to it, or two, that is there already. So what is wild to you?
Yeah.
What is nature? What are you talking about
Yeah.
in the city? Are we talking about just bringing natives back, or are pigeons okay? Or are
Yes.
starlings okay? Because
Yes.
they're making noises, they're singing out.
They are.
And
Rachel
they're
Carson
connecting
asked
people
about
to nature.
starlings. How many centuries does a starling have to be here before they're a citizen? So she had some interesting quotes about it. Great question, and I think it's a point of discussion within the larger biophilic world. My view is all of the things you mention are in the category of nature for me. I have a doctoral student right now who's doing her thesis on spontaneous unplanned urban nature. She has an acronym, and it's all about wildflowers that pop out of sidewalks. And just today, actually driving in, I was stopped at somewhere where there's a highway, kind of a ledge of just volunteer vegetation. That's wildness. So it's a wildness that we're not as comfortable with, right? I mean, we worry about things that are unkept or abandoned, and the High Line started that in that way. Someone was showing a slide earlier about the High Line. We took this really wild, abandoned elevated rail line that had all of that native, not native necessarily, but volunteer vegetation, and then we designed it. It's a beautiful space, but it's very designed now, the James Corner.
I'm saying that everybody please limit themselves to one question so we can have a variety of people.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. I am part of a community civic group that is working really hard to introduce the aerial gondola.
Oh,
in
okay. I've heard of this.
And I heard a hiss back here. Yikes.
Uh-oh. We're in a debate about this. Yeah.
Right. Have you experienced city? I know there are several cities in the nation that are looking at this. There's many cities globally that have installed gondolas for transportation. Do you have experience? Have you looked at that at all?
I don't have direct experience. I have, I would put on my other hat, which is as a sort of urban planning.
Could you say something really positive about it?
Yeah, I know. In fact, I think when I was here in October, there was a story in the American Statesman about it that I hadn't been aware of the proposal. As you undoubtedly know, it has become a solution in many parts of the world where you have terrain that's difficult.
Well,
you have a river, but in Medellin and Rio de Janeiro are places where, this is the only way to get to provide access for favelas, and so it is very successful in that context. And amongst the mainstream public transit community, it's more, there is more discussion about it. But I thought actually you were going to go a different way, which was what about the nature and transit? And the gondola might be a wonderful, way of experiencing that nature.
Absolutely.
And we have
Solar
some,
powered. It's very earth-friendly and
right.
very small.
Footprint, yeah. So we have a number of cities. Oslo, for example, has mentioned these huge forest preserves, and they have metro stations entirely for the sole purpose of getting people to those spots, and an easy, fast kind of way. And we have examples. San Francisco, another example of where they've, the cars, the Muni cars, they've purchased particular styles of car with big windows, and they're very sensitive about bay views as you're traveling along that transit. There are a lot of kind of biophilic elements of daily life that we tend not to think as much about, and that snippet of a view or that brief inspirational on your way somewhere, and it might be in a transit. We'd rather have you be in that transit, vehicle rather than your car. But that's a biophilic experience as well. So.
Hey, I have one question, and it's elongated though.
Uh-oh. Okay. Uh-oh.
No, it won't.
Multiple parts to the question. Three-part question. Yeah.
How would you define resilience?
Ooh.
And how much does Biophilic City incorporate or know about transition towns, which are related?
Sure. So do you have a transition group here in Austin? Probably you started, there are probably multiple groups.
I looked at when I was studying it.
Yeah.
I came across it, but it's not.
Do you all know about the transition movement? This is a more of a grassroots, global, international movement. There are little, groups all over the world, and it's about sustainable living. It's about growing more food, about producing renewable energy. It's a kind of an eco-city idea, quite parallel and quite complementary to a lot of the things we talk about in sustainable communities. And I find the transition folks to be very supportive. And they're, almost every city has a group there, and they show up, and they come to meetings, and they, and nature is usually, is a part of that framework in some way. So I like the agenda. I don't think it's all that different from what we're already talking about in sustainability and resilience. In terms of the definition of resilience, there are a bunch of them out there. You know, I have a couple of books about resilience. I'm happy to refer you to connection to this. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because a lot of people are making this connection now. So I have a good friend, Jay Nichols, who's written this book, Blue Mind. I don't know if any of you have come across that. I highly recommend it. It's all about the power of water. And he documents the healing power of surfing, for example. Nature has this remarkable ability to address, you know, post-traumatic stress, all those kind of things that test our resilience, our family and personal resilience. And there is this idea called urgent biophilia out there, which is, you know, a place where that resilience and biophilic, where those agendas sort of come together. So I think it's a powerful combination. And but I tend to go to fairly, you know, common definitions that intuitively that make sense to me. Like bouncing back, you know, bending but not breaking. If you can make a city more natureful, as New York and some places are doing, so that, and the example of the park in Pittsburgh, if we can, you know, endure the flooding or sea level rise or a hurricane in a way, you know, we reimagine that shoreline as a dynamic natural system that is a form of nature that we enjoy and we visit, and it provides access to the water, but it's also, you know, resilient in the face of those shocks. So that's, I think, a really productive way of seeing this intersection. Okay, sorry, that was long-winded.
When cities sign on to be partners, like Austin just did, is this just aspirational, or are they pledging to implement something specific?
That's a great question. We make it clear that we're not in a position to certify that a city is biophilic, whatever that might mean. I mean, we recognize it's an open question, and what makes sense and what is possible will depend on the city and the location, the context. We don't want to be another U.S. Green Building Council. We can't be that. It's not LEED certification. We're not checking off boxes. We're not certifying, you know, and that's confusing sometimes. I get emails. I've gotten an email recently from folks in Birmingham. Birmingham's grappling with its green belt, and it may end up taking some of that green belt for affordable housing. So I've gotten emails. Well, how could you certify Birmingham as a biophilic city if they're doing this or that? And so it is aspirational, but there are requirements. So the commitment by way of a resolution or proclamation adopted by City Council is one of them. You can go online, there's a protocol, a set of guidelines on the webpage, and you can see all the things we require in the application. You have to choose, commit to certain indicators that you're willing to monitor over time, so you can discern, you know, discernible progress over time is part of what we'd like to see. There's a narrative part of it, which is how, you know, in what ways are you already biophilic? What are your aspirations for the future? But basically, you're right. This is an aspirational initiative where the network is about cities coming together, voluntarily coming together to be part of a network and agreeing to help each other and to support this global movement. So if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Given that it's aspirational, I'm curious if you've seen any attributes from cities that are better able or interested in committing to a biophilic approach, whether those are, and by attributes I mean demographic, governance style, something else entirely, and especially if you've seen anything that you didn't expect to see.
Yeah. I think maybe the obvious things, there are many of the cities that have been early members, San Francisco, Singapore, are cities already excelling. This is just a nice parallel aspiration for them. It complements things they're already doing. There's a certain sensibility there. So I guess I have been a little bit more surprised, to get to the second part of your question, with some cities, Milwaukee and Pittsburgh, would be examples of this, in St. Louis as well. St. Louis is not Portland. St. Louis is not San Francisco. Decidedly not. I mean, but yet this resonates for them. And they are worried about saving that last bit of prairie, and they're worried, they want to rethink their relationship to the Mississippi River, and they're really embracing butterflies, monarch butterflies. I mean, it's just remarkable to see that, which leads me to another part of it, which is that having champions has been a really key part of the story. So in the case of St. Louis, it's Mayor Slay and the sustainability director, Catherine Warner. In Pittsburgh, definitely Mayor Peduto, but it's been having, there's a guy named Richard Piacentini who runs the Phipps Conservatory, and he started convening a group, a biophilia group, and showing movies and having speakers, and I went up several times, and you really need champions, and you need champions to get it going and to become part of the network, but also to kind of follow through and shepherd it and see, what do you want to accomplish in the future. So there's a little bit anyway for you.
Sorry. I took that pause as a good time to jump in.
Yes, absolutely.
We have about 10 minutes left on the room, the space, and I have 3 questions queued up, and that's going to be all we have time for.
Okay. Do you want to tell me the 3 and I'll, or
I
have them?
I'll let you know we have 10 minutes, and then I have to do some closing comments.
Sure.
One thing that I think is really interesting about the cities that have pledged in terms of being a biophilic city is obviously they're committed to the theory and the idea of it. But one thing I'm curious about is, among the most successful cities, a number of which you highlighted in your presentation, what has been really like a kind of maybe like minimum financial investment you've almost seen? I'm thinking in terms of both public and private.
Yeah.
Because obviously you need not only this theoretical commitment to it, but there's got to be something behind it.
Yeah. That's a great question, and I don't know that I can give you an actual range in numbers, but Singapore would probably be on one side, and their financial commitments are in multiple levels over a long period of time. Financial incentives for green things, the cost of regulating and planning, and not a big surprise perhaps in Singapore, and all the way. I'm struck by maybe St. Louis falls into this category. I'm not sure what the garden, the butterfly garden initiative, for example, wasn't a terribly costly thing. So I am convinced, and we have examples in our network of cities that have been able to do a lot with a little bit of money. And just the example actually in Pittsburgh of having a little bit of food in a venue. It's not quite that simple, but and it isn't always a city government that's taking the lead. That's another thing to keep in mind. We're finding often. So we have a group. I don't know if I mentioned the group in Philadelphia. There's a group called Biophilic that we've helped to form. It's the coolest name of any group, right? Biophilic. And they've already organized a couple of bird design charrettes, and they have a big, actually their second or third major event coming up in May. And they've gotten some corporate sponsors in town, but it's entirely been organized by citizens, and there's an architect in town that's been really influential. They get a lot of people coming out to their events, and they're pushing the city. They want the city to be part of it, but you can do an awful lot to change the narrative and to raise awareness and lay the foundation for longer-term natureful programs and projects with a little bit of money, I would say. Okay, 2 more.
So in Austin, a lot of like the kind of private green space is just privatized in the form of like people's backyards.
Yeah.
And another, and also we focus a lot on like, you drive to your house and then you have like green space around your house. A lot of other cities, it's more based around like you have a lot of public green space. People focus more on walking to destinations. What do you think is better fit for what your vision is?
Well, I think we should take advantage of whatever possibility exists. And often we have cities that have a spectrum or a variety of different kinds of spaces. And in Milwaukee, are a number of examples. You have very urban settings, and there might be an urban vacant lot, but they're also kind of more residential, suburban parts of that same city. So you need a kind of palette of different strategies, even within a single city. Most of our European partners, have a kind of culture of public commitment to public space, and this, like Vitoria in Spain, there's this incredible, if you want to, you don't spend a lot of time in your flat. You have a smaller apartment. Probably you're living in a multi-story home, and you go outside and you stroll every evening, or where do you go to have that dinner or that dinner with friends, and it's outside somewhere in the public realm. So you kind of have to build, I think, a little bit on the culture of that particular place. But I do, there are a lot of really cool ideas and stories for how you can take that low density suburban setting that many places have, and make that profoundly more biophilic and natureful. We should also be, increasing density and doing other things to retrofit that landscape. But bless you, it can be a lot wilder and can be, a lot more biodiverse, than it often is.
I wanted to ask about equity.
Yeah.
And, in Austin, we are I think a biophilic city, but we're also one of the most economically segregated cities.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't done enough within the biophilic community to figure out how to connect biophilia to an equity agenda.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering, where you've seen that done best, and how we can start to make those connections and advance biophilia in an equitable way.
Yeah, it's a hugely important question, and we're all grappling with it. And I don't have a perfect story or perfect answer. I mentioned the High Line a little earlier. It's interesting. I think what's positive now in our discussion about this is that it's front and center. So just thinking about how we presented projects like the High Line, just 5 years ago. Now we're not as celebratory about it. We recognize it's had some displacement. It's had eco-gentrification is now terminology that we commonly talk about. We need to figure out. In this book, there's a whole section about just biophilia. That's language, and it's kind of interesting that we've had a few tweets about the book already. Somehow they've gone through the book and found this section. It's on our minds, and it's a profoundly important question. Everybody is entitled to that nature, and we want to make sure that you have a fair access to nature, and that means trees and all the things that we know tend to be associated with higher income and less minority kinds of neighborhoods. There's a profound fairness there. We also don't want to create unintended consequences from our projects. So you probably know all about this. There's a whole discussion about just green enough, which Jen Walsh and some other folks are kind of advocating. And some places that have actually adopted that strategy, I think it's a little kooky, but the idea that that lower income or that minority community gets a little bit of green, a little bit of nature, not so much to induce gentrification or displacement, but enough to provide some nature. And I think we've just got to figure out we need tools and mechanisms to figure out how to, capture and redistribute the benefits of projects like the Highland, or High Line rather. Sorry, Highland. I'm in Scotland or somewhere now. I don't know. My mind is moving on. So it's a really important question. So in the Biophilic Cities Journal, by the way, take a look at that. There is a little profile, among others, a profile of the organization Urban Relief in Oakland, California. I don't know if you know this group, but it's basically a story of a group that started because essentially essentially black neighborhoods in Oakland, didn't have trees were not there. The founder talks about how she worked at the Soledad prison, and that the Soledad prison was greener than the neighborhood that she went back home to, and how unfair and unjust that was. So we need to be empowering. We need to be funding organizations like that. It's essentially a community tree planting group, and they're getting now funding from the California Cap and Trade program, and so we need to put our money too where our values are. So it's a really important question. So thank you for asking that.
Thank you guys, and thank you, Tim Beatley.
Sure, thank you.
I think Tim is going to hang out.
Yeah, I'll hang around for a little while.
I know he has to drive to Houston. Yeah. So, first, I just want to say Forest Walk. I'm so ready to go do that maybe tomorrow. It's been a really long day. We've had a really awesome day with Dr. Beatley talking about biophilia with city staff and with you guys tonight. And I wanted to let you know what we have is Nature in the City Austin on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and that is a way for us to share our resources and information happening all over the city with you guys. Nature in the City Austin. Please like us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at NaturallyATX. We also have a Nature in the City Austin blog that we have started, and we have a Nature in the City speaker series. And if you would like to be added to the email list for that, because I will not just go and grab your name, you actually have to let me know that you want to be on it. So you have to email me at leah, leah.haynie at austintexas.gov. I'm with the Community Tree Preservation Division in the Development Services Department. So you have to call 311. I'm Leah Haynie. Yes, it's HAYNIE. LEAH. I think this is starting to short out. I also have some announcements. We hopefully have a video featuring Natureful Austin coming into the works. It'll be focused more on social media, so it'll be a little different. We'll be working with Dr. Beatley on that. We'll soon have a webpage hosting information about biophilic cities, nature in the city, and hopefully contact information. So it'll be easier to sign up for the speaker series. Yeah, and we're actually going to hopefully launch a podcast. So we'll let you know when that comes. It says, right, so I want to say thank you to Imagine Austin. Yes. So 3 to 5 days, Imagine Austin Speaker Series website. You can Google it. And thank you to Imagine Austin for having us and Dr. Beatley here. Thank you.